My, you guys have aged. You guys have aged so much in the last month.
No kidding. If you gone through what we went through the last month, you also would have aged. I was a young man when Rosh Hashanah started. No gray hairs.
Yeah.
You know, then all of a sudden, boom, boom, boom. Like when we mentioned before with Jay, when one of the things we have to ask God when we finally get him on the podcast is why he decided to put all the holidays within a 4-week period, no respite, no chance to catch your breath. Now this month, Cheshvan, nothing. Looking for.
Can you
a
imagine if there was a holiday this week? I don't know if I can handle it.
I couldn't. I can't even imagine it.
How were the holidays aside from all of the cooking and congregation demands?
To me, it was invigorating.
Really?
Yeah, invigorating.
That's nice.
Oh yeah, well, it starts off. It's interesting how it starts. It starts very serious in Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, but then morphs very quickly into joy and happiness and dancing.
True.
So, and I'm glad it's done that way rather than the reverse, where we could have had Simchas Torah first, the dancing, and then then transition into something very serious. And
I have to say one thing. Not that I like to compliment you, but I always think to myself, like, it's, I don't know what, your 40th. No, what am I saying? I'm older than that, so it's your 45th, let's say, holiday season. And I always think, okay, that's it. He has nothing left to say. There's nothing he could say this year that's going to move anyone. And yet, we come to Yom Kippur service right before Yizkor. The room is packed. There are probably, 500 people in the room. And you have everyone sobbing, tears pouring down everyone's face. And I'm like, how? I don't even know what you said, because all I was thinking is, how is this possible? These people listen to you every year, and somehow you manage to move the congregation. I'm really impressed. It's a skill.
Because it says, Shem Hashem, God protects the fools. He knows I'm up there. I'm naked to the world. I'm exposed. I have what we talk about. When you come into the room, they're going to expose you. What's that?
Fear? You have like a fear?
Your fear, like they're going to finally find
you
out.
have imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. So I get up there. I'm always fearful. Oh, they're going to finally find out I'm not really a rabbi. Like the guy's like a plumber is acting as a rabbi. I wish I was a plumber now.
I know.
But
no, it's incredible. Good job. You really did a good job on the high holidays, I have to say. It was very, very good.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Maybe you'll stop underestimating me finally after 45 years.
Probably not.
Never.
Probably not. Who's going to keep you humble if not for your family?
I know. This says, true. It says, "Ein Navi be'irei." A prophet can never be a prophet in his hometown because they always remember him as a pisher. What? You're a prophet? Nah.
You always tell me that. I know.
Go to Nineveh. Nineveh, they'll respect you. And it's true. When I come home, like if I go to Montreal. They remember me as a pisher in Montreal, and there's
right.
You're a rabbi. Since when?
No, but you did a good job. Okay, right. So we have
a lot to talk about today.
We're going to go through the next few weeks. The next few episodes are going to be about great Jewish thinkers and heroes, people that you may have heard of but maybe don't know anything about. And so we're starting off this series with one of the greatest, a person who, if you know anything about Jewish law, Jewish philosophy, Jewish history, you should be familiar with his name. And hopefully today we'll dive in a little deeper and get to know his works and maybe him personally a little bit. And that is Maimonides, Reb Moshe ben Maimon, the Rambam, as we call him in Hebrew. If you've been to Israel, there's a good chance that you've gone to his grave. He's buried up in Tiberias, northern Israel. He has a beautiful, I don't know, what's the word for the room? The whole setup of his grave is just very, mausoleum. I don't know what the word is, but been there several times. It's really nice. And, he lived a long time ago and he's still a central figure, I think, for most Jews. So I think it's a good way for us to start talking about Maimonides.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So I will say in preparation for this, I was telling Leah, I bought Guide to the Perplexed. And
Yeah,
said,
good luck.
I got through about a half a page, and I said, "Okay, this is I'm gonna go with the rabbi's summary of this."
Well,
Exactly.
well, I mean,
you,
for
you
most
know,
people, to be honest, most people who read Guide for the Perplexed are more
Yes,
perplexed.
exactly.
It's not, it doesn't make you less perplexed. It makes you much more
Like most
perplexed once you
philosophy.
read it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, you know, when there's a compendium, like a reader, background
Right.
reader that goes along with you can buy with the book that's almost as long as the book.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're probably in above your
Yeah,
head.
exactly.
So, but before we turn anybody off, so just quick 30-second overview before we get into the details of why should people care about Maimonides?
Mhm.
Well, like Haile said, he's a central figure, within Judaism. Really revolutionized what Judaism is about. Certainly in the world of intellectual pursuit. Those who know about Maimonides, he was born in Spain at a time after the Muslim conquest. So they lived pretty much among Arabs, Arab tribes, the Berbers, the Moors, who had conquered Spain during the 8th and 9th century. Maimonides himself was born in 1135. His father was a rabbi, Rabbi Maimon, in town, and Moshe was one of his sons. Now, there are reports that I've seen that early on, unlike many other scholars where you could see their brilliance early on when they were children, he didn't exemplify that. He was a student, but when he was maybe even a regular student, but when his father sent him away to study, and he ultimately ended up learning with the Migash, Rabbi Yosef Migash was his primary teacher, and he came home, and his father asked him, was accustomed then, to invite him to speak from the pulpit, and he was 18 years old, and he literally blew away the crowd. I mean, literally blew away the crowd. I mean, with his knowledge and his depth and his wisdom. And he went on to write some very, very important works within Judaism. As far as the legal system, this is where I think he makes his biggest mark within Judaism. Until Maimonides came around, if someone wanted to know a specific rule or a law, he had to literally be either knowledgeable in the entire Talmud and in the very few books that were written at that time, responses from the Gaonic period, which lasted from about 500 CE till about 1000 CE, and they wrote responses. So you had to be knowledgeable in their responses, or you had to have a rabbi in town that was. Other than that, it was impossible for you to be knowledgeable in all of Jewish law. Maimonides took it upon himself to organize. This is after hundreds of years, maybe even more, maybe 1,000 years, of scholarship from the time of when the Mishnah, which we had talked about in the previous episodes, when the Mishnah was written, until Maimonides, all of the rules and regulations scattered all over the place. Maimonides literally sat down and took 1,000 years worth of scholarship and put it into a 14-volume work called the Yad HaChazaka. Yad HaChazaka is strong hand, or Yad. So that's Yud Dalet is 14. There were 14 books. So he called the Yad HaChazaka, or called the Mishneh Torah, just a concise works of the Torah. And in it, he writes in his introduction that what you need if you want to know Jewish law is the Chumash, means the Torah, the written tradition, the Torah, and this. Now, which was very controversial, because when you're knocking out the entire Talmud, you're knocking out everybody else. But what he meant to say is, he didn't say don't learn Talmud or don't learn the responses or don't learn other commentaries on the Torah. What he meant to say is that this is going to revolutionize. So if you want to know, for example, let's just take an example on Shabbat. If you wanted to warm up your knish, okay? Maybe you went home, you had some knishes, and you went to shul in the morning, but you didn't want to eat cold knishes from the things. Now, we know cooking is forbidden, baking is forbidden, and it's one very, very serious, very serious sin to desecrate the Sabbath, but can you warm it up?
Wait, should I tell you the answer and see if I know it? Can you do it on indirect fire because it has no liquid?
Yes. It has, yes.
Okay, good.
Under certain circumstances.
At least I know what I'm doing.
Under certain circumstances, you can. If you've prepared beforehand. If you have an open flame, the answer is no. But that's not the purpose of this example is not to give you the answer. It is the difficulty of what happened at the time. You either had to have a tractate of the Talmud of Shabbos. You had to know that there's a certain section dealing with cooking and preparing, know exactly what page that was on. Even then, there was differences of opinions between the Tanoim and the Amoraim, the authors of the Talmud. So you didn't know which way to go. Could you? Can't you? Hillel, Shammai, Abaye, Rava, Rabbi Yochanan, Resh Lakish, back and forth. Okay, so you said, okay, that's no help. Let me see if there's some responses. So you had to own all of the responses, that took place afterwards. By that time, it was already Tuesday, so you didn't have to worry. The Shabbos had ended, Sunday had ended, and it was Tuesday. You could warm up your knishes because okay, so you didn't have to. That was the problem. Came along Maimonides and put everything in an orderly fashion. So you had to still be a bit of a scholar because you had to know, the laws of Shabbos. But he has a whole section on the laws of Shabbos, and you go through it with chapter. And you go through what does it deal with cooking and baking, and he didn't give any footnotes. There were no footnotes, which was again very, very, very controversial, because he just decided this is the way I'm going to rule. Because there are many, many, many questions. I mean, some people say yes, some people say no, some people say under these circumstances, under those. He didn't bother with any of those. He just put the law down, and that's the way it is. So there was a lot of backlash towards him. Number one, where did you get this from? Why do you rule this way? And number two, who gives you the right to do this? I mean, to just write a works and take it upon yourself. But great people do great things, and extraordinary great people do extraordinary great things. And this was totally revolutionary. And we, in 1984, I believe, the Rebbe instituted the study of a Rambam on a daily basis. So we go through the entire works every year, and some go through it every 3 years. If you study 3 chapters a day, you can go through it. It's impossible to comprehend how he actually did this with no Google, no internet, no help. I mean, just with a quill and paper, to go through this, everything in his head. I mean, he had to remember everything in his head.
But it's also that he adjudicated that's the part I think that's revolutionary, is that he said, okay, we're going in this, we're taking this opinion, and this is what we're doing.
Now again, we should add that post Rambam, there were those that disagreed with him. I know, and even on the commentary on the Rambam, you have.
So let's not go there. Let's not go there yet. I want to ask about that later on.
Okay, we'll get there.
That was the rabbi's version of a 30-second overview. So that was.
So that's why people should care about it.
Yes.
So just to add a little context, you one of the things I wanted to ask about, and you mentioned he grew up in Spain after the Muslim conquest.
Correct.
Could you talk a little bit about, just to sort of put him in the context of the world he grew up in, could you talk a little bit about what it was like being Jewish in Spain during that time period?
Oh, it's interesting because early on, the Muslim world was a world that loved philosophy and culture, and particularly the conquest of Spain allowed Jews to prosper in Spain. It was called the Golden Era. So even in the 10th century, there was Chazi ibn Shaprut was a prime minister, in Spain to the Caliph. So so the Jews, although they were not Muslim, they got along with their Muslim neighbors, and and they prospered, and they lived a good life. So and in the beginning, this is where Maimonides and the Maimon family thrived in. Unfortunately, later on, Spain was overrun by a very, very, very different type of a Muslim branch of Almohads, which were very different. They were not what we would call in America tolerant, of other religions. They were not tolerant of other sects. It was only Islam and Islam alone. Very fundamentalist, just like we have now, for example, the ISIS. And I would consider them the ISIS, the precursors to ISIS. And that's what changed Maimonides' life. Later on, he had to leave Spain, but early on, they had a very good relationship. I mean, he wrote in Arabic. He spoke fluent Arabic, and sort of, I wouldn't say he appreciated Islam, but could see that there was something within Islam that was, positive. I mean, they believed in one God. They didn't have any icons. It was certainly not idolatry. Maimonides rules that if you need a place to pray, and it's whatever it is, you can go into a mosque and pray in a mosque. Unlike Christianity, which he was not fond of, because he believed that Christianity was idolatry, because of the belief in in the Trinity and all of that, and forbade people from going into churches. But Islam, I mean, he wasn't maybe greatly fond of Muhammad, and early on in starting Islam, but he never had a problem with Arabic or Arabic
He wrote
language.
in it,
Matter of fact,
didn't they? He wrote in
he wrote
Arabic,
he wrote
in
he wrote he
Judeo-Arabic.
wrote Arabic.
Yeah.
Yes, he wrote Arabic. As a matter of fact, one of the books that we'll talk about in a little bit is the Guide for the Perplexed, was wrote in
Right.
Arabic.
Right.
In other works, he wrote letters. He wrote in Arabic. So so that was the kind of milieu where he grew up in. But then all of a sudden, the revolution came with the Almohads. He had to leave Spain and he moved to Morocco, which was very interesting, because if you read a number of biographies of Maimonides, and just parenthetically, Maimonides is not only viewed as a great person within the Jewish
Right.
world, he's viewed as a great philosopher in the secular world. I mean, people wrote. There's many books written about Maimonides, and in colleges and universities, around the world, because he also had an impact in world philosophy and world medicine. I mean, he was just an incredible, writer. So when he went to Morocco, people were wondering why he would do that. I mean, because the Almohads had come from Morocco, and so you're going from the pan into the fire, So there was speculation, and of course I don't buy this, and none of many Jews, is that maybe for a while Maimonides kind of
Converted.
embraced Islam to a certain degree. It's just total speculation, false, I believe 100%. But I just throw
Yeah.
that out there because in
Interesting.
case somebody comes upon that, I wanted this guard that immediately. But there are people that would argue that, but why else would he go to
Right.
Morocco? Oh, because probably he was either hiding as a Muslim, or he was maybe embracing Islam a little bit, and then from there, he doesn't spend much time in Morocco. He goes to Israel. He finally flees to Israel. And interestingly enough, doesn't spend much time
Right.
there either, because Israel at that particular time is run by the Christians. The Christians had come, with the Crusades, and ran, and were in charge. And he was not fond of that. So he eventually made his way over to Egypt and to Cairo, and that's where
I
he
mean,
spent
just
his life.
just speculating, but one thing we'll talk about is he was also a very influential physician
Hmm.
at
Yes,
the time, on top of being a theologian.
correct.
Potentially because of that, he could have gone. He thought that maybe because he had this other skill set that was valuable to the Moroccans, he could go and try to change their views of maybe he was an idealist and thought that
could have
maybe he thought he could change their perspective on Judaism,
Yeah.
and then quickly realized that he
Yeah, and
couldn't.
it's not happening. It's not
Yeah.
happening.
So who knows?
Who knows? I mean, it's hard to know that, because it doesn't write much. He doesn't write much about that. But I don't think, if going through his life, I don't think he begins to practice medicine until he actually gets to Egypt.
Oh, okay.
I
Okay.
think because there's a reason why he got into medicine, is because he had a brother, David, who supported him. His brother was a diamond merchant, and they had like this kind of what
Did
we
he
would
have
call
to be diamond merchants? I mean, like, could we?
So
Could
cliche.
it have been something else? I mean,
I
geez.
mean, I could have
I
said
mean,
he was
just
a fisherman, but there's a reason why I mentioned what he was, is because he supported his brother Moshe, realized that his brother was something special, and they had what we would call a zvul and yisachar, like two brothers. One was studied and one supported the study, so they both got credit, for Maimonides' study. And the reason why I mentioned he was a diamond merchant, because he got lost on one of his journeys. He was traveling for merchandise, and the ship lost, and he perished. And Maimonides then were cut off from any funds. He had no way to support himself after his brother died. So I think that's kind of what pushed him into getting a job,
Right.
because not many people were buying, like a Guide for the Perplexed yet. It wasn't being put out by Penguin or like Simon and Schuster yet. So he was having a tough time peddling his books.
Right.
So I think that's what pushed him. And of course, physicians in the 12th century are not physicians in the 21st century.
Right.
I mean, you didn't have to
Right.
take your MCATs, get into a medical school. I mean, you just
Right.
put up a sign, "I'm a physician." And he knew enough about medicine that he became, the physician to the Sultan. I mean, so it's
Right.
you
Yeah.
could see what
I have a question
you could see
about the Rambam in Israel, and I'm literally digging very deep to a paper I think I wrote in like high school about this, and
Right.
I wish I would have looked at it before we started recording, but I remember it being kind of painful, the writings that he had from there. No, like, didn't he have an expectation of Israel being a certain way, and then it was not that, and it was painful that he
Well,
had to leave? And he felt like it was a sin. Like, didn't he agree that you couldn't leave Israel once you got there? And the fact that he had to move from there to Egypt was controversial. Can you say a little bit about
he did.
that?
He did. He did. I think a lot of it had to do with being part of the Christian
Mm.
world, where he just felt totally
Alien, right.
alienated. I mean, he came from a completely different culture, and this was a very different culture. And of course, there were not many Jews living at that time in Israel. It wasn't like a flourishing country.
Yeah.
They had suffered a lot through the Crusades, and he didn't feel a presence there,
Right.
and calm where he needed to be able to sit and to write
Mm.
and to do that. And he does write that he left grudgingly, because he rules that you're not allowed to leave Israel under only under very certain circumstances, like to get married or for business. But when he moved to Egypt, even though there's clearly a law
Right.
against not bringing the people back to Egypt, God tells Moses, never bring the people back to Egypt. Maimonides later on would sign his letters, Moses ben Maimon, who transgresses 3 sins daily.
Right.
That's what he would write, because I'm living in Egypt, and it's not supposed to, and this and that. But he understood that obviously that he's allowed to go to Egypt, but it was with a certain amount of
Right.
guilt that he lived in Egypt. But that's really where he prospered a lot.
Yeah.
In Egypt, that's where his fame became. I mean, everybody started to know about him, and then it's just he became world famous and infamous at the very same time, because he was not afraid.
Right.
He was a person that was just not afraid to put his thoughts in writing and to spread them out, and he just had this indefatigable amount of energy that he had. I mean, because the amount of works that he produced at a time when you literally had to write everything yourself and just do that. It's incredible. I mean, it's
Right.
not normal. That's why it says, and when you mentioned before on Tiberius, at his resting place, it says, "From Moses to Moses, there were none like Moses."
Right.
And that means from the original lawgiver of Moses until Maimonides, there was no one like
Right.
him. And this is true. The effect. I mean, look, we're talking about him now
Right.
in 2021.
We're in 24.
I
But
mean,
yeah.
24.
why am I thinking 2021?
It's okay.
I don't
It's
know.
okay.
Oh boy.
Because I've been Rip Van Winkle. I've been a sleeper. Is COVID over?
Well, we'll cut that part.
Are we still asking? 2024. We're talking, this, hundreds and hundreds of years later, we're talking to him and the impact that he still has on us. I mean, it's incredible.
Go ahead, Jay. Sorry.
So how did his philosophy differ from previous Jewish theologians? What did he do that made such an impact and caused such controversy?
So, first of all, one has to understand that Judaism is a religion of deeds and not creeds. So 90% of all of our writings are only geared towards ritual and legal aspects. Very few philosophical writings were around before Maimonides. Not saying there were none. There were. Sadia Gaon had written on philosophy. Others had written on philosophy. But there were not a lot, of philosophy written about Judaism, because, I mean, in all honesty, people cared more about the size of a lulav and what color an esrog has to be than whether God has a form. I mean, Really? I mean,
Right.
and there's a difference. And could you really appreciate if God has a form or not, or what the difference between matter and form is? But Maimonides lived in a different era. Maimonides lived in an era when Islam brought philosophy into religion in a big way. And he saw that many Jews, especially Jews that were philosophically bent, were being captured by Islam. And they were looking for someone in Judaism to defend the faith,
Right.
defend Judaism's faith. And there was no one better than him. So
Mhm.
I think he felt compelled to write Guide for the Perplexed under these circumstances, because people were converting, and he had written letters of conversion to many. There's a very famous letter, Igerish Shmad, that he wrote to people in Yemen, and Igerish Taman to people in Yemen and other places, about philosophy and about why Judaism is the true and rightful religion. And therefore he decided to write the Guide for the Perplexed. Maimonides admits fully 100% that he is an Aristotelian thinker. And again, this became very controversial, because even scholars and great scholars who had written books on philosophy never admitted that they even read Aristotle. I mean, much less that they appreciated Aristotle. I mean, Maimonides writes greatly in his favor that he was about
Mhm.
as smart as you can get. Now, he was wrong. Maimonides wrote that he was wrong, but he praises him. And the praise, to a Greek, the secular, atheistic, polytheistic philosopher, was anathema to rabbis at the time. So Maimonides wrote it piecemeal. We'll just talk about the book just piecemeal. And he had a student, Ibn Tibbon, that was going to translate it from Arabic to Hebrew. And he wrote a chapter and sent it to him. He was in Spain, and I'm sorry, he was in Egypt, and the student was in Israel. So he kept sending it back and forth, chapter here, chapter there, chapter here, chapter there. And that's how
Wow.
he wanted to write the book. Ibn Tibbon sends him a letter and says to him, "Your writings are very dense, very difficult to understand. I would love to come and spend some time with you face to face, just to ask you certain details about, questions that I have." We have Maimonides' response to him, and he writes to him like this: "I get up usually at around 3 o'clock in
It's a
the
great
morning.
letter.
You know,
Yeah.
I get going. Prepare for my day. My day starts. I daven. Pray. Get on my donkey. Go to the Sultan's house. All day I'm seeing patients at the Sultan's house. I haven't eaten anything. Finally, at about 5, 6 o'clock, they take me, they put me over my donkey. I'm so exhausted, they have to lay me down over my donkey. My donkey takes me back home to my house. I eat my first meal at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And by 7 o'clock, the community's already at the door waiting for me to meet with them. I meet with them from about 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock at night. At 11 o'clock at night, I finally sit down for 2 hours to start writing. And by 1 o'clock, I lay down and I'm up by 3. So you tell me exactly when I have time to meet with you. I mean, this was his response. Now, maybe he was exaggerating for 10 minutes. I think he went to sleep from 1 to 3:10. I don't think he got up at 3. I think he got up at actually 3:10. But he lied. He exaggerated. That was his schedule. I mean,
It's true.
even if he was exaggerating double, even if he was exaggerating doubling, he slept for 4 hours, slept for 5 hours. I mean, think
Right.
about this. I mean, it's crazy to think about that, but
Mm.
he did it. He pulled it off. He wrote Guide for the Perplexed. It went around the world very quickly. It was actually burnt in by the rabbis in France, and they convinced the monks at that time, who were when France, of course, a very Catholic country. They convinced the monks that this is heretical. I mean, they had no clue what the book was about. I mean, the rabbis read it, had no idea
That's
what
hilarious.
it was, because they were not Aristotelian philosophers, nor were they understanding what Maimonides was getting at. The Guide for the Perplexed is written in 3 parts. There's the philosophy, and there's the mitzvahs, and then there's the third part to it. And this was, I think, the first instance of book
Yeah.
burning, where they actually burnt Maimonides' books. And then later on, the French, of course, extended it to the Talmud, and then, of course, kept going. But this is how controversial it was. that oh no, we can't have this, and especially the rabbis in Baghdad that always thought of themselves, the Iraqi rabbis always thought of themselves that they were the leaders of the Jewish people because that's where the Talmud was written, and that's where the great yeshivas were. But by the time Maimonides came around, Baghdad had lost its opulence,
Yeah.
and
They
no
weren't
one was
central
looking at
anymore.
Baghdad.
Yeah.
The more central. Now Maimonides was gaining all this popularity, and everybody was talking. Ooh, did you see what Maimonides wrote? Did you see what Maimonides wrote? So the rabbis in the East didn't like him. The Baghdadians didn't like him. The French didn't like him, but he didn't care.
Yeah.
He didn't care. He was going to do what he was going to do, and ultimately truth prevails. And his son Avram, who survived him, spent his entire life defending his father from all of these, arguments and claims against him. Interestingly enough, very few rabbis attacked him while he was alive. I mean, it was like fighting, like Mike Tyson at
But
his
did
prime.
they know about him? Would they have known?
Yeah. Everybody knew
Okay.
about him. I mean, he was worldwide.
Okay.
Maimonides was worldwide. Everybody knew his writings already were reaching far and
Right.
wide. His letters.
Yeah, he has a letter
He
to
wrote over
Yemen. Right. The community in
his letter
Yemen.
to Yemen, his conversion
Yeah.
letter. He wrote over 2,000 letters. Besides his
Right.
books, he wrote over 2,000
Right.
2,000 letters.
Did he
we
know?
know that
Did
from.
he know about Rashi? Like, was
Did he
Rashi
know?
famous?
I'm sorry, Chayleya.
What?
Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead. I didn't hear
Did
you.
he?
You froze.
Did the Rambam know about Rashi? Was he familiar
Yes,
with
he
his
did.
work? Oh, he was.
He knew about Rashi, but it was two different types of learning. Rashi was a commentary on the Torah. Maimonides does not have a commentary on the Torah.
Right.
Interestingly
Right.
enough, I mean, many people did, but he figured, you know what? From all of my writings, you'll figure out what I think about about the Torah. But he did give an introduction to the Mishnah, so he does have a commentary on the Mishnah, and he's of course written the Yad HaChazaka, his book on Jewish legal law. And he wrote philosophy, books on philosophy, and many and other commentaries on the ethics of our fathers. He has he has a huge library, of works. But I was saying very few rabbis during his lifetime wanted to challenge him because this is Maimonides. But after he passed, then they came out of the woodwork, and his son Avraham, who defended his father, was also a tremendous scholar. Tremendous. I mean, he knew all of his father's writings, backwards and forwards, and was able, to defend them. But ultimately, as years passed by and centuries passed by, his fame not only diminished, it just grew and
Right.
grew and grew. And and again, as I think we had mentioned at the beginning, that even though that not all of the codifiers agree with every one of his legal decisions, there are others that argue against him. And if you look in the Code of Jewish Law, the Shulchan Aruch, which we follow, the Mechaber, Rabbi Yosef Karo, many times disagrees with the Rambam, and rules not in the Rambam's favor. Then, of course, Rav Moshe Ishalish, who wrote Ashkenazi commentary on the Code of Jewish Law, also at times disagrees with the Rambam. But that doesn't diminish him.
Right.
That just shows that he's the constant, and everybody has to deal with him.
Right.
You may disagree with him, but you have to deal with him. But certainly in the places that they don't disagree with him, that became law. That became law. And not only did he do that, and I'll just finish with this thought. Where he differs from everyone else is he wrote all the laws, even those that were not pertaining to the particular time that we lived in. He wrote on the complete Torah, laws concerning Tum and Tara, purity and impurity, laws dealing with sacrifices, laws dealing with agricultural laws that were irrelevant at the time, when he was writing. So he literally, the entire Torah is found in those 14 books.
Wow.
If he had written just that, Dayenu.
Right.
It's I think I might have mentioned this in an earlier episode, but when I was younger, like I think a lot of probably people like of my ilk, we spent time reading a lot of like the atheists, like Dawkins and Sam Harris. Sorry to, I don't want to insult Hialeah by insulting Sam Harris, but the thing that I read that really just convinced me that they were wrong was reading Aristotle. And so the relationship between Maimonides and Aristotle was always very interesting to me. But specifically, one thing about Aristotle that I think really is the concept that really changed my mind more than anything else I've ever read, is his concept of the unmoved mover, or the prime mover.
Cause. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
cause.
The
And
cause. The
yeah.
cause.
So do you want to talk about that concept and how Maimonides sort of worked within that concept?
So he agreed 100% with Aristotle as the prime mover. The big difference was that Aristotle believed that Adam Olam Kadmon, that the world always existed. There was no starting point to it. It was always here. So this whole idea that we have to like start to think about how did the world came about. The world was here. It was here. And the prime mover did it, and that's the way it is, and there's nothing more really to speculate on that. All our job is to take it from day one and move forward. Prior to that, there's no prior to that. That's where Maimonides, of course, differs greatly. He does believe in his whole concept of form, that God has no form, and that you can really picture God, and all of those things in the Torah that talk about God's hand and God's anger are all allegorical, all allegorical. This is where he differs greatly also with the Kabbalists, because they do believe that there's, that God has emanations. He was strictly an intellectual and a philosopher and a rationalist, like Aristotle. So that he believed in. But of course, where he different was that he believed in the first cause. Yesodis Amud HaChachmos. He writes in the first chapter in his first book that the foundations of all foundations and the knowledge is Leida Sheyesh Motzei Rishon, to know that there is a first cause, that there is someone, whatever you call that from this first cause, everything emanates from that. That's where he differs greatly from, Aristotle. You can agree on a lot of other points from that point on, but that's where he says that there's a conscious mover, meaning that somebody, we'll call him God at this point, made a decision at some point in time to create a world. That Aristotle didn't buy that. That Aristotle couldn't fathom that. That idea that why would someone want to do that?
Right.
I mean, because this is a great problem in the Torah. God doesn't tell us what the purpose and meaning of the world is. Aristotle didn't have to deal with that issue because it was we're always here. I mean, there's no before that, and that's where Maimonides radically changes from him. That's where he kind of lines up much more with the Islamic philosophers that also believed, in a prime mover, in a first cause, that there was, a distinct decision made by something for the world to be in existence. And that thing that we call God, everything emanates from him, but he's unknowable. I mean, Maimonides writes many, many times, he's unknowable. And he goes into great it twists and turns of how to explain this kind of idea of free choice, which he believes in very strongly. But how do you do that if you also reconcile that with a first cause that knows everything? So if he knows everything, he knows what you're going to do. And if he knows what you're going to do, it's already been decided what you're going to do. And if it's been decided what you're going to do, so how do you say you have free choice? So Maimonides goes into this great detail of, that's another thing you could read in there, and you can, don't try to read it before you fall asleep because you'll wake up a heretic. That's what you say. Don't read that. But that's another one of his, ideas of, God's knowledge is not our knowledge. When we say God knows something, it doesn't know it like I know it. Like I know that right after this podcast, Chayle is going to have a coffee. I just know it, and she'll get up and she'll make herself a coffee. Oh, you took away Chayleia's free choice of not having a coffee.
Right.
No, I happen to know Chayle very well. I mean, we've known each other for 45 years, but that's not God's knowledge. God doesn't know that Chayle is going to have a coffee right after this podcast. His knowledge is completely different because he is the knower, he's the knowledge, he's the known. And then he writes, after he explains this in great detail, that no one can understand this. Thank you. Thank you very much, my listeners. Thank you.
And in case anybody listening isn't familiar with the concept of the unmoved mover, the concept is that I'll give my explanation, Rabbi. You can tell me where I'm wrong.
Go ahead.
So everything you'll ever interact with in your life is affected by time and space, right? Every single thing from the smallest atom to a galaxy will change over time and ultimately be destroyed, right? Whether it's, people or a table or your house or atoms that exchange electrons or suns, stars, a supernova. But that can't be true all the way down, because if whatever's at the base level of that was constantly being changed like that, then reality would constantly be unmade. And you could never predict anything because reality would constantly change. So there has to be something at sort of the base layer, however you want to look at it, that is
unchangeable,
is the bulwark of everything that never changes. And that thing is completely incomprehensible by humans because it goes against everything you'll ever experience in your life. And that thing is the unmoved mover, which, you could call God.
Which we call God.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's a fair. It's a good explanation. And interestingly enough, as we develop in science, we begin to see more and more that we move in that kind of a direction. They won't admit it, physicists, but we see now that we've proven that nothing ever gets ultimately lost. In space, matter turns into energy. Energy is going to be around, even in black holes. You have a tremendous amount of energy. So we see we're moving towards that concept, even in the scientific world, where things are not lost. It exists for, we'll call it forever. Forever, and that forever is akin to what Jay was talking about.
Right.
That you know what, there's something there. If they would be alive today, if Aristotle and Maimonides would be alive today and start looking, Aristotle would say the Big Bang Theory, it's nice, but not changing his opinion. Maimonides would say this proves what I said all along, that the Big Bang Theory started this, and there's a conscious decision to do that. It didn't happen the way scientists would explain today because
by
of this
accident,
fusion by accident, by this energy coming together. My mom say that's what I'm talking about. Now that's exactly the first mover. So it's just very interesting that that point they agree.
And that's always one thing that perplexed me was people who would say, well, the Big Bang, proves that there's no God because that's where it started. But where'd that come from? Like where'd that energy come? Like that, nothing comes from nothing.
Right.
Nothing.
But at some point, either it was infinite, and Aristotle was right, and it just always existed, which is incomprehensible, or someone created that thing, which is also incomprehensible, but it had to come from somewhere.
Right.
I think that we were going far afield from
Maimonides.
We're just talking about this science.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that Maimonides would say to if he was sitting over here is the reason why scientists want to deny this is not because of the knowledge of science, because that if you do admit that there is a prime mover, if you do admit that there is a cause, it comes with responsibility. It's not free. I mean, just to think about it, that if there is somebody out there, call him God, call whatever you want to call him, that made a decision to create the world, there's got to be purpose behind that. And that purpose lays responsibility on us humans to do something. And if you're a scientist, you don't want that kind of restrictions. If you're a human being, you don't want that kind of restrictions. You'd much rather say, no. Listen, it happened haphazardly. It happened by accident. And therefore, you know what? If I want to do whatever I like, that's what I do. I'm not responsible to anybody.
Right.
I'm not responsible. My monitor would say, you are responsible. You are responsible, and then there's a certain way to live life. And he was very, very strict about following all of the rules and regulations.
Right.
Just because he was a scientist and a doctor, he wasn't lenient. He didn't say, you know what? Who cares about fasting on Yom Kippur? Oh, no.
Right.
Yep.
All right. So to bring this full circle, who did sorry, I had a brain fart there for a second. What philosophers came later that were influenced by Aristotle? Or sorry, by wrong guy. By Maimonides in his writings.
So there was a period of great in the 13th and 14th century, it was a great burst of Jewish philosophy, writing Rabbi Yosef Albo, Sefer Ikrim, Kreskis, great philosophers came out. There was other less known, philosophers. All of them, I would say, every one of them was influenced by Rambam's writings. Ramban,
Right.
Ramosha ben Nachman, who was not a contemporary, but lived shortly after Maimonides passed away in Spain with completely different surroundings. He was already after the reconquest of the Christians. Nachmanides, he was tremendously influenced by Rambam. He disagreed with him on many points in philosophy. He was more of a Kabbalist, Nachmanides, but everybody was influenced, all Jewish philosophy. The Kabbalists, were influenced by him. Ramosha Cordovero, Reb Chaim Vital, the Arizal. You can't get away from Jewish scholarship.
How about the Rebbe?
And then, of course, the Baal Shem Tov, and following Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, was influenced. So his touch, and his aroma that he left, permeates throughout Jewish scholarship. And no one could say, "Hey, you know what? He's irrelevant."
Right.
He's relevant. Mm-hmm. He's relevant in all of our writings.
I want to ask you about two things.
Sure.
Number one, I want to talk about his medical stuff for a second, and then I want to talk about the 13 principles of faith, because I have a question about that. So it's interesting. There are books out about Maimonides' diet and the way he told people to eat, and I know people who follow it till today. Okay. And he had a very, he was almost the first person who believed in preventative care. I mean, he has a whole regiment.
Holistic.
Yeah, very holistic. And really taught the idea of what you eat matters and how you eat matter and when you eat. And it's actually very interesting. If people are interested in looking it up, it's fascinating. And one of the things that he teaches, and I'm saying this because my in-laws were very, very into this, is not to eat melon after a certain time of day because it sits in your stomach and it's not, and it makes you bloated or whatever, he had all of these little things that were very revolutionary for a doctor at that time. I mean, these are not things that, he didn't go to Harvard Medical School. So if you want to look at his diet stuff, it's really interesting. And then I have a question about the 13 principles of faith. So I grew up, obviously, I thought that was from the Torah. It was so central to how we were raised to think about Judaism. I didn't even realize till I was a little older that those were put together by Maimonides and then changed by other people later who said, no, actually it's these that are the most important principles of faith. But how did he have, well, I guess my question is, why did he choose those? And you don't have to go through all 13, but I'm curious how he came up with that. And how did he have the confidence to say that this is what you have to believe to be a Jew? And how seriously do we take that?
We take that very seriously. I mean,
right.
These are things that are fundamental to our faith. Maimonides, we'll talk first about the question of of his courage. You either have it or you don't have it.
Right.
I mean, this is not something that you kind of you acquire in a store, or get by going to therapy. You have this kind of courage and you have this kind of confidence in yourself that this is going to happen. Yeah. I mean, this is what it is. Maimonides, again, lived at a time where people needed to be told exactly what is it that we believe and what is it that we don't believe. I mean, think of it. Today, who cares?
You don't have to believe anything. Yeah.
No, we're not thinkers. Right. We're not philosophers. But back in the day when Maimonides was dealing with this idea that foreign elements are coming into Judaism, he's dealing with the Karaites, and he's they're still around, around,
and Islam,
and Islam is around, and Islam is spreading around. So Maimonides felt a tremendous necessity to write to the average person, even a simple person could understand that this is what we have to believe. And number one, God has no form. He always was. He always will be. The Torah is true. Moses is true. The mitzvahs are true.
Yeah.
And then, of course, coming of Mashiach and the coming of the resurrection of the dead.
Right.
These are all matters that are part and parcel of Judaism. And if you're a believing Jew and you want to be, you want to come to the world, you want to get heaven, you want to get to heaven, this is what you're going to believe. And this is the faith that we all by.
Right.
So it was very, very critical at that time, and it's critical today. To know what is it that we believe and how we believe it, and then of course you could. I can tell you how many books have been written about the 13 principles of faith, and as you mentioned before, other people broke them down into 3, and then some broke them down into 7,
and into 1,
and left out Mashiach and left out the resurrection of the dead. But he felt, and the Rebbe talks a lot about this, a tremendous amount of time spent, on why Maimonides put Mashiach in, and why he put in Tchias HaMesim, resurrection, in there, and how it is fundamental to Judaism, and why it is important to Judaism, and
I personally find it comforting. I know it sounds weird to say, because like you already quoted once in this episode, and you quoted a lot. We're more about deeds than creeds, but I do find it comforting sometimes to read through the 13 principles of faith, just as a reminder of what I'm supposed to be like. What am I supposed to believe, right? Because the world is so it's confusing and it's big, and the way I feel about anything regarding God or religion can change even in 1 hour, where I 1 minute I'm so confident in what I think, and then a minute later I'm like, ugh, that's nonsense or whatever, and then I think when I look through those 13 principles of faith, it does ground me a little bit to say, okay, maybe you don't believe everything right this second, but here's a kind of a path, right? It's a guide where you can, like, this is where you should work towards, and these are the things that you can contemplate and think about. And I don't know, I find it, I really appreciate that and find it comforting. I don't know.
No, it's they're important.
Did I stun you by saying that? No, I'm just kidding.
No, it's great. I mean, awesome.
Also, last thing I'll say, if people are interested in reading about the Cairo Geniza, which I think we might have mentioned before, but it's a place in Cairo where they used to put all of the writings, and where they would store all the sort of trash. I hate using that word, but things that they were not trash, but I'm saying things they were getting rid of that were. It was a depository, right?
And there was a depository.
Yeah, so there's a lot of Maimonides' writings are in there, and so we got a tremendous amount that were discovered in the 1800s, right in the late 1800s. So if you're interested, you can read more about that.
I mean, there's no lack of works about Maimonides. Forget about his works, but works about him.
True.
I mean, there's and people who are interested should definitely pick up a copy of there's biographies. I mean,
I know
more than a library.
Whenever we had to do school projects on,
because whatever we talked about him today is just scratched the surface. I mean, literally just scratched.
When I was in school, whenever there was a project that we had to do about a famous Jew, it was the fight always started with who's getting Maimonides, because it was the easy, like there was so much content, and then I ended up with I don't know, the
Roche.
Yeah, exactly. The Taz. I got the Taz. There was one line written about him. No, but definitely there's so much that we could say about Maimonides. So do more research, read about it for sure.
Yeah. And we'll link to all the stuff too in the show notes.
Oh, wait. So I want to say one last thing. I know this is so small, but Chabad is very strict about the way our Hanukkah menorah looks. And this is I think people will be fascinated to hear this, because if you think about a regular menorah that we light on Hanukkah, Chanukiah, it could look rounded. It could look, there's all different ways that it can look. But if you come into a Chabad family, or a house that follows the Rebbe, you'll see that the menorahs are all straight lined. The branches of the menorah are all straight. And that's because the Rambam had a drawing. Is this correct? Am I saying the right thing, Da? The Rambam drew out what the menorah looked like in the temple. And so the Rebbe was very careful that we should have the correct way that the menorah looked, and same with the tablets, right? The tablets.
I mean, that doesn't mean that the other menorahs.
No, I'm not saying they're not kosher. No. I'm not saying they're not kosher. I'm just saying that we're careful that we try to. Many people, not all, but many Chabadniks try to buy straight line menorahs, or in the imagery of a menorah will be straight. And I think same with the tablets, right? The picture of the tablets that are rounded at the top are not the way that the Maimonides pictured them. He said they were straight, square, like 2 boxes, squares. So it's just interesting, these little cultural differences that even thousands of years, however I can't do math, but however long ago he lived, it was definitely over 1,000 years ago. We still are careful about some of the things.
He died in 1204.
And
so
what are
how
we
many
at?
years ago
I don't
was that?
know.
We're at 2124.
Whatever. It was almost 1,000 years ago.
Almost. Close.
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 Yeah, it's good enough.
Thank
good enough
God this is not a math.
I feel like I remember his
Yeah.
850th birthday. Is that possible? Because I think there was like a huge, like Orthodox world, like did a huge celebration for his 850th birthday. So yeah, maybe not quite 1,000.
I mean, there's much more to say about that. But we'll go on.
So before we wrap up, 2 quick things about the show updates.
Yes.
Number 1 is we're going to start separating, in case you haven't noticed, when we started the show originally, we were doing cultural discussions and then Parsha at the end. And in case you haven't noticed, we don't get to the Parsha at all about 50% of the time or so. And some people are interested in one and not the other. So we're going to start putting out separate episodes with the cultural discussions and the Parsha. So at some point, we're going to start doing 2 episodes, putting out 2 episodes a week, one for each. So if you're not sick of us yet, you will be.
Totally. We're just going to inundate them.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That's how you're going to get listeners. Keep putting out podcast after podcast after podcast.
Exactly. It's a volume game.
Yes.
Exactly.
The second thing is we're going to start doing a book club, and we're going to start reading books and then discussing them on the show within the context of sort of a Jewish line of thinking. And so roughly what we're going to do is about probably a month in advance of reviewing the book, talking about the book, we'll tell you what it's going to be, so that if you want to follow along, you can read it, send us questions if you have questions that come up while you're reading it, etc. And so so about once a month we're going to do a book club discussion and maybe bring a guest in to join us for the discussion. So the first book that we're going to do is The Sunflower by Simon Wiesenthal. And so so check it out. I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to get that, if you want to read along with us. And it should be fun.
It will be fun.
I think it'll be interesting.
Yes. And if you have questions ever about anything and you want us to talk about a different subject that we haven't covered yet, please let us know by sending us an email or our Substack. Share this podcast, like us,
give us some notes, link us. Someone told me yesterday, your interaction with Chayaleya is so nice. They used the word. What did they say about you? You're very.
Oh, let me hear.
It wasn't smart.
Well, that's good.
No, it was smart. It was smart. No. She said she's very.
She's very mediocre, but it's nice that you give her time.
No. It's that our interactions back and forth, and everybody compliments Jay.
I know.
Jay is the intellectual of the group.
Well, I'm the strong silent type. I don't say a lot, so if I just get a couple of $10 words in per episode, then I can come across as very smart.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Good stuff.
Thank you.